scary stories.
I think that my house could be a focal point of energy that attracts not only a single entity, because they act different between them. I can almost identify who is who by their behavior. I'm a 27-year-old male who, since I recall, there's been always paranormal stories about my house. The first ones that I remember are family that lived in that house years ago before I was born. It started with one of my uncles. He said that voices were calling him at any time of the day, calling his name, random cold spots in the house. And someday he discovered in his body scratches, and some of them still with little blood on them, and in places where he would not reach with his own hands. That phenomenon continued during years until he went to a spiritualistic person. I don't know how to call it in English, but it was someone who deals with tarot, cleanings, and that kind of stuff. He said that there was something attached to him. He made him a cleaning and went to the house at the back of my grandparents and performed a spiritualism session, claiming that he could not make much for the house, but that he needs it to go from the house since the entity is focusing on him. After a little time, my uncle ran off from the house and became a priest. Currently, he is still operating at his church and talks about his experiences and how he became closer to God in order to stop feeling followed, observed, to stop listening to the voices and feeling the scratches. My grandparents were always skeptical, but not my other uncles and my mother. Another one of my uncles was sleeping on the couch when something grabbed his foot, pulled him off, waking him up, and started to pull him through the living room. He told me that he was seeing a large foggy shadow with no legs, only from the torso to the head, with one extremity holding his foot. He started to scream for help, and that's when his brothers came running into the kitchen, turned the light on, and there was my uncle on the floor, screaming. This happened after my priest uncle left the house, since he was one of the older ones. My mother is one of the youngest of them. When she was a teenager, she invited friends to the house for a sleepover, and when they were all sleeping, a strange sound woke her up. She claims that the sound was like a damaged throat trying to make a sound. She opened her eyes and she claims that a shining woman entered the room from the wall floating. She told everyone not to move. The figure was still floating and displacing through the room. My mother covered her eyes, but with a little peek, noticed how the woman was laying horizontally above one of her friends, doing the sound. After a while, the floating woman returned to a vertical position and left the room through the wall. My mother could not resist the crying and told her friends about it. Another experience from my mother is that some night she was laying in her bed sleeping when suddenly she entered a sleep paralysis. 3 winged little figures were flying in circles above her. She described her as a haired, naked woman who was whispering things that she could not figure out. She started praying, and after some time, the entities flew to a big mirror in her room. I was a little kid by the time, and I remember how that mirror was covered sometimes after that event. These stories that I have told you are considered true by the people involved. These are only a few experiences that convinced them that there is something in here, and I believe them. It appeared that the thing that was haunting my uncle started focusing on me during my youth. I tried to explain the scratches on my body with normal things like I was cutting myself with my nails, but the patterns did not make sense. They were more like animal scratches. I convinced myself that I wasn't doing it, when one time I saw the scratching appearing from nothing. I just felt the pain, looked, and from nothing it appeared. As far back as I could remember, I've been plagued with horrible nightmares. I'm not talking about the childish nightmares many children say they have, such as the man in the closet, or the I'm falling from a cliff dream. No, I'm talking about vivid nightmares that feel more like memories. Memories so terrifying, it would make the most dedicated devoted Catholic lose faith, which in fact is exactly what happened to me. I prayed to God for guidance and to make these nightmares go away, yet every time I prayed the nightmares got worse. I'm fully convinced that something terrible happened to me. I've been in and out of therapy my whole life, and none of these quack doctors can tell me what is wrong with me. I've developed a dependency on drugs and affection from anyone that would give it to me. Growing up, my parents always taught me that drug abuse was never the right way to go, and even had the pastor at the local church teaching me about what could happen if I went down that road. Obviously, none of those lessons got through to me. Around midnight on Halloween, I was startled awake by a rustling noise coming from my closet. I sat up and just stared at the door, waiting to see if I could hear it again. Was any of this real, or was I just way too high from my 2-week binge? The noise started again, this time growing louder, as if it were right underneath my bed. Instead of just sitting there like a complete moron, I got up and bolted for my bedroom door in case I needed to make a quick escape. I realized that I was just being paranoid when the strayed cat that usually climbed into the house through a hole in the bathroom floor crawled up from under my bed. It was a relief to know that it was only an animal that I knew very well making that noise. I got back into my bed and lay there for what seemed like an eternity and just could not go back to sleep. The cat jumped onto the bed and lay down on my chest as a way to keep me pinned down until something startled it. I sat up in my bed and listened for any sort of noise and was able to hear something moving around downstairs. These noises seemed to grow louder with every passing second. I got up and made my way downstairs to investigate whatever was making the noises in my house. At first I thought it was the cat again, but then I remembered that the cat had ran off after being startled by the same noise. When I got to the last step, I saw this creature that looked more like an animal-human hybrid than anything else. The creature had piercing red eyes and made this growling noise that sounded similar to a rabid bear. All of a sudden, I was hit with this overwhelming scent of rotting flesh and sulfur that made my eyes water. I could not even begin to comprehend what its body looked like because it was just that horrifying. Instead of running away like I should have, I just stood there, petrified in fear, finding myself silently praying to God for help. I continued to pray and the creature began to slowly inch its way towards me. It seemed like no matter what I did, this thing was intent on catching me. I backed away with every step it took, and I eventually tripped over one of the steps. The creature was just a mere inches away, preparing to latch onto my throat when somebody knocked on my front door. The knocking must have startled it because when I looked around, it had vanished like there was never anything chasing me in the first place. I got up and answered the door, letting out a sigh of relief. When I saw that it was my best friend standing there, she told me that she was concerned about me since I never seemed to leave the house and told me to go out with her down to the ratty old gas station just up the road to get a late night snack since it was the only place that was open. I happily left with her, but one thing still bothers me. What was that thing in my living room? Was it a demon sent from hell? Or was I just imagining the whole entire thing? I'm sharing an experience of mine in hopes that maybe other people have had the same thing happen to them and have more knowledge on what it is. Allow me to describe myself. I'm Hispanic, but I don't really participate or dig into my culture much. Unfortunately, my family is more involved with our culture than I am, so occasionally I do participate in some holidays or celebrations. When I was young, my parents would drop my siblings and I off at our grandparents' house. Due to both of them working long hours, my grandmother was a kind yet fragile old woman who knew more Spanish than she knew English. Although she did not have cable or anything of entertainment, We enjoyed going because of the folklore she shared with us, from familiar tales such as Weeping Woman and the Owl. We would listen attentively with such fascination. My grandmother was a peculiar woman, though. It never came to my attention, to any of my siblings nor I, about the lack of mirrors in her house. Only when a cousin of ours had visited my grandmother was it pointed out. When asked by my cousin if there were any mirrors in the house, my grandmother sternly told her no, and in Spanish, not to be so vain about herself. My cousin then asked her why she didn't have any. My grandmother responded, I have my reasons. I guess this answer satisfied my cousin because she did not probe any longer. After hearing this, I too noticed that there were not any mirrors in the house at all. This made me curious, so I asked my grandmother what her reasons were for not having any. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee when I asked this. I still remember the grave look she had on her face when I asked, Listen to me and don't forget what I am about to tell you. There is an evil thing that lives in the mirror. It can be any mirror in any place. It's always there waiting, but you'll never see it. It shows itself when it sees something that it likes, and when that happens, it comes out of the mirror to take whatever it is. As she said this, my skin broke out in goosebumps, and the room suddenly felt a lot colder than it was. As I have said before, I've listened to my grandmother tell many other stories and folklore, but none of them were like this. My grandmother looked serious, and her tone was very stern. I realized that this wasn't a story, but a warning. How do you know about it? I asked her. For a second, she stared into space and seemed to daze off. Then she focused her eyes on me and said, Go play with your brother and your sister, Andel. I began to protest and was demanding an answer. She told me to behave and took off her sandal. Upon seeing that, I immediately ran away from the kitchen and out the screen door to the front yard where my siblings were playing. After that, it seemed to escape my mind and I never brought it up again with my grandmother. Unfortunately, I'll never get an answer to how my grandmother knew about such a thing, as she had passed away when I was 11. I want to say that maybe it was just another piece of folklore that had been told to her before, but I know now that this isn't the case. Earlier tonight, I was brushing my teeth in my bathroom and was just about to finish. My sink is located right next to the door along the light switch. I have a habit of turning the light off before exiting the bathroom, leaving in darkness for a second or two. Nothing out of the ordinary has happened before until tonight. I turned the light off as usual and was about to exit, when something in front of me caught my eye. In the darkness, I saw a faintly illuminated face in the reflection of my mirror. I was immediately startled and quickly turned the light on. There was nothing but my terrified reflection. I felt a sense of confusion because I could have sworn that there was something there. So I chalked it up to being nothing and proceeded to turn the light on again. I saw it more clearly. This time, I had only had the light off for maybe 2 seconds or so. But believe me when I say this, the faintly illuminated face resembled a woman's face. The eye sockets seemed dark and deep, with no eyes, the face motionless. At first, then suddenly, it formed a huge grin. I immediately turned the light on and ran out the restroom. I stumbled into the hallway and into my bedroom, where I proceeded to lock my door and jumped into my bed, covering myself with my blanket. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just run out of the house or go to the kitchen to grab a knife or something? Well, understand, I was scared out of my mind and acted on impulse. My mind was running at 100 miles per hour, and I was having all of these thoughts, the thought of calling the police and saying that there was something in my house, but I was too scared to uncover myself at the time. Suddenly, the memory of my grandmother telling me about the thing in the mirror rushed into my head. My heart sank and I began to tell myself that what my grandmother said has nothing to do with this. I mustered up some courage and reached out my arm from underneath the blanket to the little lamp next to my bed. I felt around until I found the little switch and turned the lamp on. When I saw the familiar light through the blanket, I slowly uncovered myself and looked around the room. There's no mirrors in my room, I thought. My mind kept going back to my grandmother's words. I'm beginning to calm down now and decided to browse the web for help. Nothing's turned up, and as far as now, I'm still locked in my room. If anyone out there has experienced anything like this before, or has knowledge of what this thing is, please contact me. As I type this, I can faintly hear something that sounds like glass being tapped on from down the hall. Ever since I can remember, I've seen demonic-looking people around me. They tell me to do things, and at first I did not listen. But then one day, while walking past a particular mean dog, the biggest one tells me to go kill it. So I walk into the yard, pick up a hammer, then approach the dog. Now this dog was big and it was mean, but for whatever reason, it was only mean to me. But still, my neighbor had it chained up, so it could only snap at me from the length of the chain. I remember smiling, then smashing the dog's head in over and over. Can't really remember what I felt back then, but I think it was joy. What I do remember is all of the blood and bits of bone that flew out of it. At the age of 12, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia and have been on medication ever since. Of course, the meds did not work. I can still see them, but they don't harm me. They don't even seem to want to harm me. They kind of just serve as my conscience. But anyways, I ended up just using the medications to get high, and for whatever reason, I managed to make it to college. Now by this point, I am able to keep the fact that I see these demons a secret, and have had a very normal life, a small group of friends, and a girlfriend. I never got any pleasure hanging out with the friends I made, and I mainly just do that for my girlfriend, Sarah's sake. But it's fun to dazzle them with some piano skills. Apparently that's a dying art, but I don't really care. One day I bring up my schizophrenia. I can't remember what brought it up, but ever since then, we have been growing apart. I don't think she told any of her friends, but they can tell that something's going on. They try to talk to me, to pry it out, but I don't want to talk to them. It's not out of malice or anything. They're just so damn boring. So today, while I'm sitting at the piano playing a song and everyone's all gathered around, I notice that Sarah and her best friend are talking and stealing quick glances at me. I played a softer song and focused on listening to what they were saying. Turns out that they were talking about me. I hear Sarah say, "He's just so broken." Now a bit of history on me and being broken. I've had family members and neighbors and teachers all tell me things like I'm broken or very unwell. Not a fun thing to be told. And even as I display a strong academic skill set, I was always considered broken by many of them. Broke a teacher's arm for calling me broken one time, and that shut the rest of them up. So it's a very triggering thing to say to me. So the big demon, who always is by me, even when the others aren't, leaned down and whispered to me. At this point I'm glaring at her, and she knows that I heard her. I had gotten a nice high that morning, but I was coming down off of it, so I thought, what the hell? I stood up, filled with hatred and anger, and she got up to apologize. I grabbed her head with one hand, my thumb digging into her eye, and grabbed her shoulder with the other. I opened my mouth and took a nice big bite out of her throat. As soon as her blood hit my tongue, all the hatred and malice left me. The warm, raw flesh, thick blood, and odd sensation of killing left me feeling joy. It was fun. It felt good, and the flesh tasted surprisingly good. She gargled loudly, blood spraying my face, and collapsed, squirming slightly. So of course everyone started screaming. The other demons dropped to their knees and bowed. I really don't know why they did that, but they seemed terrified of me. Even the big one was keeping his distance now. Anyway, I should probably wrap this up. I can hear the cops knocking at my door, and I don't want to be fined for them breaking down the door. During my senior year of high school, my friend Sean came to visit from another state. His brother and sister-in-law, my best friend Candace, and I were all hanging out when we decided to drive to the local park. It was dark out, around 8 or 9 p.m. At the entrance of the park is the only skate park in town. It is small, and you can see the whole thing and everything in it when you stand in front because the place is well lit with lights. There are no trees or shrubs surrounding it, just flat grass, no hills or other landscape features. As we are driving by the skate park, my friend Candace and I say, "Pull over," and we had never seen the skate park busy at this time of night, and there were so many people there. We were curious as to what was going on. We all get out of our car and are standing together at the front edge of the skate park. When we get a closer look, we notice that we don't recognize a single person there. This makes no sense. We are from a super small town where everyone knows everyone. As we are looking for a familiar face, we finally spot one. It is someone from our school, Dan, who was a skater. He was somewhat of a lone wolf, an odd kid with not many friends, tall and lanky. He was always easy to recognize because he often wore the same clothes, red shorts and a gray shirt. "Oh, there's Dan," I say, and I point towards him. We are looking at him as if he is rising up in the bowl. Our other group members are chit-chatting with someone at the park, not paying attention to what Candace and I are saying. As we see him, we see someone behind him following him everywhere he goes. He initially thought it was a person, but as he is coming up from the bowl and starts skating around the edge of the skate park towards us, what we thought was a person behind him is a black, upright, morphing shadow shape that is growing taller and wider and getting closer and closer to Dan until eventually it covers Dan's entire body. And as soon as this thing covers Dan's body, both it and Dan disappear. My friend loses her shit. I had seen a shadow person before, so I was less freaked out than her. She runs up to where Dan was and looks for him, but he was nowhere. Just disappeared when we were looking right at him. "Maybe he fell or something," she cried out. Well, there was nowhere he would have fallen that we would not see, and we did not see him fall. One instant he was there, the next he was gone. We did not talk much on the drive home. We were both in shock, and we never mentioned it to each other again. At school on Monday, I did, however, ask Dan if he was at the park that night. He did not want to answer. "Please, Dan, just tell me." "Yes," Dan said. But that was all. Still to this day, I have no more answers. I feel like reaching out to him on Facebook and sharing my side of the story so I can hear what his perspective was.